Hi. Hi to everyone at Running at 40 Plus. We're thrilled to be here with Sara Crosland. Hi Sara.
Hi.
Hi. So Sara is a totally inspirational woman. She's a survivor of a life-threatening brain tumour. She's a mother of 3, and before the diagnosis of this brain tumour, she was running half marathons, she was running 10Ks, she had a career in special needs education, she was a violinist, and also she had a photo studio. But following a hemorrhage of the brain and major brain surgery, this left her unable to walk. She had impaired vision and balance and permanent hearing loss as well. She's overcome so much adversity to achieve many feats, climbing mountains and even a skydive, and of course her love of running. She's inspired others. She's written this most awesome book, Sickbed to Summits, and I've been really inspired reading that, and I thoroughly recommend that as well. So thanks for chatting to us, Sara. Could we ask you when you first noticed the symptoms and how that led to your diagnosis?
Okay, so it was around Christmas time in 2017. I was working as the music coordinator in a primary school. Busy time of year. I just felt incredibly tired, which impacted on a lot of other things like memory. And so I just brushed it off, plodded on as I did, and then just before Christmas we had to have our dog put to sleep. I spent the last night with him sleeping on the floor, and woke up a couple of days later with really bad joint pain. So I just thought, I'm getting too old for sleeping on the floor, and so again brushed it off and carried on with life as best I could. But the pain increasingly got worse right through the Christmas period, so I went to my GP, I think the beginning of 2018. We had lots of blood tests done, and a vitamin D deficiency was picked up, which can cause joint pain. So I thought, great, start taking the supplements and that will be the end of it. Unfortunately, it didn't help. It got worse. I ended up on anti-inflammatories, and more sort of investigative blood tests were done. So we looked into all kinds of autoimmune conditions, even Lyme disease, as I'd been bitten by a tick the previous summer. And it all kind of drew a blank. Then I started, I think it was the beginning of February, to get numbness in my face and double vision on one side. So I went back again to my GP, and this obviously was more of a red flag for her. So she spoke to a consultant in Liverpool who asked me to go urgently for MRI scans and a lumbar puncture. So I went off to hospital, and a few days later I had a whole barrage of tests were done, and I had the scans, which immediately picked up the tumour. So it came as quite a shock, as you can imagine. I think of all the things that I had envisioned being the cause of my issues, it wasn't a brain tumour wasn't really on the list.
And it was a big tumour, wasn't it? An acoustic neuroma.
It was a 3 centimetre acoustic neuroma. That then grew quite rapidly, so within the space of a few months, what is normally a very slow growing tumour had grown another centimetre. It was causing brainstem compression. That was causing issues with my heart rate, my blood pressure, sense of smell and taste were affected, my vision became worse, and my balance function was quite affected. And so we had the surgery date planned for May 2018, and that was a really long wait. And your husband was quite instrumental in that. He had done a lot of research. He found this amazing consultant, didn't he, at the Salford Royal, was it Scott Rutherford? Yes.
And he desperately wanted you to see this person because he knew he was an expert. And how did that all materialise, that you saw him and he realised how serious the brain tumour was, because he was the one that could identify that it was cystic in nature, it was rapidly growing, and was he the one that suggested the surgery needed to be sooner rather than later?
So initially I was referred to a more local hospital, I won't name names. The paperwork got lost in the system, that was an urgent referral. And so in the period that we were waiting for this referral to be made, Neil, as you said, had done his research and found this consultant over at Salford Royal. So we actually had to go private to see him. And then we took a drive out there, and he was able to access eventually the scans that were done at my hospital. They weren't available when I'd gone for my initial consultation because of another mix-up, and so we had to wait again for him to see them. But whilst we were chatting, he said, you know, what is it that you saw on the images? So I explained that it was a really obvious white golf ball sized blob, and he was like, really? And I thought, yeah, you know, it was so obvious on the scans that you couldn't have missed it, you know. And so we talked about various treatment options there and then. So there was the option of radiotherapy or surgery, or, you know, if it was not doing anything and not causing any worsening of my issues that I was suffering from, watch and wait, which is, you know, quite common in acoustic neuromas. Many people find themselves on watch and wait for years even. For me personally, I was quite angry that this had happened to me, and I just wanted it gone. So we did discuss surgery. Obviously before that, you know, we had to find out more about the size of it and stuff. And so I had to wait for him to have sight of the images, and he called me back the following day and said, look, you know, it's actually very large. We're going to take it to a multidisciplinary team or an MDT meeting at the end of the week and discuss it, just to make sure that, you know, there are no other options. And he did, and called me back again and said, you know, we've all looked at these images. It's cystic. It's going to be quite complicated because of the way it's growing and everything. So our advice is to go down the surgical route.
Right. Yeah. And of course, you had the awful experience of having the brain bleed prior to having the surgery, where you were desperately ill, being rushed to hospital, not knowing what was going to happen. And what was that experience like? That must have been terrifying.
It was terrifying, but I think at the time I was so sort of wrapped up in just actually dealing with pain and dealing with that situation as it was happening, that I didn't sit back really and think this is terrifying. I think that came later. So at the time I was just busy surviving. I was just trying to get through every minute of the excruciating pain that I was in. And it was later on, I think, that the impact of that hit me, when I kind of realised the severity of what had happened. Yeah.
And so your operation was scheduled for about 2 weeks after that had happened, and you went into the hospital to have the surgery. And was I right in saying the surgery lasts 8 to 9 hours? It was a big operation.
It was around 9 hours, which was actually shorter than they anticipated.
Right.
Because as is the case with these tumours, some can be quite sticky and hard to remove and attached to various nerves and things. Mine wasn't, which they was very surprised at, given that it had just hemorrhaged as well. So I was really very lucky. But yeah, it was about 9 hours, I think.
Yeah, and when you came round from the surgery, I was reading and say that the book is so inspirational, and I recommend it to anyone when Sarah documents what she's been through and the recovery process after. You know, it's just such an inspiration to everybody. And I was just interested in your thought process when you came round. You were saying that the room felt tilted, you couldn't walk, 2 physios were needing to hold you up, and you were having to walk with a frame, that whole recovery process, but you were determined to walk out of that hospital. What was it like around that time where you realised in your mind that you were going to do this, even though it seemed hard? That must have been really difficult to be in that situation when you came round.
Well, I think prior to my surgery, I think the worst 2 weeks were in that period between the hemorrhage and the actual surgery date. And I was not, psychologically, I was not in a good place at that point. But, you know, I think with some support from some good friends, I was able to think, right, okay, surgery is day one, and from that point onwards I know what I'm dealing with. At the moment I was too busy worrying about things that may happen, may not happen. There was just too many unknowns. So I thought I'll just focus on getting the surgery done, and then I know what I'm faced with. But yeah, you know, you're right when you say my world literally was tipped upside down, not quite upside down, but 90 degrees. So people were coming into the ward and they were walking on the walls. It was really quite a bizarre experience, and I was quite frightened actually at that point, because I was thinking, they've messed something up in my brain. What's gone wrong? You know, they're going to have to go back in and sort this out. So it was quite frightening. I think it was the impact of trauma from the surgery, things just being quite inflamed. But yeah, having people walking on walls was quite a frightening experience. And also my double vision was like just ridiculous. I had like one clock on the wall ahead of me and another clock a metre to the side of it. It was really horrendous. So I was given an eye patch to wear just so that I could focus properly on what I was doing. And like you say, I think I was under the impression naively that once this tumour was gone, that would be the end of it and I could just get back on with my life. Not the case. I spent a number of days just being quite sick. I was on anti-sickness medication. I think I had it through intravenous and orally. I also had anti-sickness patches that I would have on my neck, which are like a slow release, and they didn't really impact it at all. So I was being quite sick. Then the hospital was concerned that my blood sugar levels were dropping because I couldn't eat. So that was another obstacle to overcome. Eventually it settled down, and the physio came in to see me and said, look, we need to get you moving. And I had felt a bit better that morning when I woke up, and I said, okay, let's do this then. So he got a chair and placed it about 1.5 metres in front of me, and I stood. Well, I couldn't stand, so I had a physio either side. They had to unhook me from all these drips and wires and things, sat me on the bed, and helped me to stand up and said, right, we're just going to take a slow walk. So I thought, well, that's okay, I can do that, I can get over there. But as I tried to take a step, it's almost like my brain knew what I needed to do, my feet knew what I needed to do, but there was absolutely no connection between the two. So I was stood there, I think, kind of willing myself to move, and eventually, with them sort of helping shuffle me along, I probably took about 15 minutes to get 1.5 metres. And I think of the hardest like half marathons or that I'd run at that point, this was so much harder than anything I'd ever done in my life.
And of course, been through so much physically, but also mentally. You talk about trauma of, obviously, you've got 3 children, you've got your supportive husband Neil, and them having to have you go through this operation, which you knew there was a possibility you may not survive the operation. So you've had all that mental trauma as well as the massive physical battle ahead of you. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have those emotions going through your head and then having this massive physical battle. And I think the staff in the hospital just saw how determined you were. I think they suggested you go home with a frame, didn't they? And you said, no, I'm walking out of this hospital, and they knew that they could see that steely determination in your eyes that you were going to achieve that. And also I just thought it was amazing that you'd entered the race for life in Chester, hadn't you, before you were having your surgery, and you were determined to still make that start line, which was only going to be 8 weeks after the surgery. So how did you go about that process? I was interested hearing about those first walks you did. What did that feel like? It must have been just such a strange feeling to not be able to have the ability to walk with the balance that you had before and everything like that. What was that like?
It was bizarre. It was quite sort of trippy, actually. It was I can liken it, I suppose, to walking on the moon. It was quite a strange sensation at first, but like anything that's that you relearn, and the more you do it, I wouldn't say the easier it gets, but the more accustomed to it that you become. The first time I went for a walk on my own was a bit frightening. That was a bit of a hurdle to overcome, because in your mind you're thinking, what if I fall over, what if I trip, what if my balance just goes on me, because I'd felt quite let down by my own body in a way. So it was almost like you're just anticipating the next disaster. And then I think it was probably, about 6 weeks after my surgery, I started going out for slightly longer walks, And again, I'd walked on pavement, so I challenged myself then by walking on the grass verges rather than an even pavement, because I knew that the harder or the more tricky the terrain, if you like, the more it was challenging my brain, and the more my brain would have to adapt to overcome it. And you know, it's like anything, isn't it? You know, the more you do it, the better you get. So it was just a case of, even though I felt sick, just pushing through that and trying to keep going.
And you went on the bike as well.
I did.
Within about 3 weeks, you actually got on a bike. I mean, I'm sure they weren't advising you to do that at the hospital. So
at that point, I'd been advised not even to load my dishwasher. But I think I was quite frustrated with the fatigue. And in the early days, you can be accepting of it in that you know that it's your body doing what it needs to do in order to recover. But as time went on, and I was still having to take naps in the day, it just became an annoyance. So I became my own worst enemy, really, in that I'd try and push through it, and that would make things worse. But yeah, as far as the bike goes, I shouldn't have done that. I did get a telling off when I went and gave a talk at a hospital by one of the school-based nurses, and you know, she said, you shouldn't have been doing that. I said, well, I know, but it was kind of in a controlled environment, you know, and but that was a
controlled
challenge.
Environment being you on a bike having had brain surgery. It doesn't sound a controlled environment.
So Neil had been out with his friends and came back and left his bike. Stupidly, it's his fault, you see. So he left his bike out in the back garden, and I just remember sitting there looking at it, extremely bored, thinking, you know, how hard can it actually be? Because I've been told, you know, it would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to ride a bike after having had the hemorrhage and the surgery. And having spoken to like lots of other people that had gone through the same, so many of them have said, I can't ride a bike, you know.
And that made you need to ride a bike just because people had said you couldn't do something. It made you, with the personality you've got and your determination, right, I'm going to do that. And you set about that. I mean, amazing.
Yeah, so we started, I think, you know, I said to Neil, can I go on your bike? And he's like, well, what are you thinking? So I used our patio in a back garden, so we had table and chairs, and I tried to get on the bike. So that was the first challenge. I didn't have the balance to like get one leg off the ground and get it over so I could sit on the bike. So we lowered the saddle as far down as it would go, and then I sat on the bike, and I just sort of sat and got the feel of it for a while. And then I just, rather than pedal, because there's absolutely no way that I'd be able to pedal, I just sort of pushed myself along like you know, a little kid would on a trike or something, you know, just with my feet, just to get a feel for it. And when I felt a bit better, I kind of put one foot on the pedal, and I was holding on to the patio chairs just in case. And then I gradually from there went on and started to pedal a little bit more. And I was going up and down the garden, and then we found a quiet lane the following week, and I just rode up and down there. And then the week after that, I think I did 10 miles.
Wow.
So that was about 6 weeks after my surgery.
Yeah. And when you'd gone back to the hospital, was this about 6 weeks after where they gave you good news that it was a grade 1 tumour, and they gave you the go-ahead, or did they give you the go-ahead to try a little jog?
Short runs. Gentle, easy runs.
And you must have felt excited that you could maybe start to get back to some sort of running. And how far did you go on that first run?
I think I'd set myself a goal of 1 kilometre.
Yeah.
I thought, if I can do 1 kilometre, I'll be happy. But I got to 1 kilometre, and I thought, actually, I'm feeling quite good, so I'm going to carry on. And so, you know, we carried on, and I think I did about 3.5 kilometres that first run. And it wasn't a hard run by any stretch of the imagination, and it was stop-starts, and I was swerving all over the place. And I still do, actually, when I run. I have a tendency, especially if I'm tired, to kind of veer to one side a little bit. But yeah, it was good to be back out there.
Yeah. And how did that feel? It must have been exhilarating to get back to the sport you love, because what does running mean for you? I mean, how does it make you feel? Like, I think a lot of us are just, you know, we love running, and just wanted to hear what it means to you.
For me, I think with the job that I had, running for me was a means of escape. So it was time out, it was headspace, you know. It's that I don't know about you when you're running, but you know, for me, it's that time when I can just sort of think about things that are going on, and very often I get back home and I've got all these ideas that have come to me while I've been out running, and I'm like, I've got to get them down quick, you know. Half the time I've forgotten what they were. They were a brilliant idea at the time, but by the time I get back home it's gone again. But no, for me it is, you know, it really does help my mental health to be able to get out and run, and also I think, you know, running gets you out to places that you wouldn't necessarily go to otherwise. So, you know, for example, you know, this area, it's just fantastic to get out and run different trails in a different area.
That's amazing. And so you did achieve your first goal that you'd set yourself, to run the Race for Life. And that was only 8 weeks after the surgery, and you ran that with a friend who helped you round, and it must have felt amazing to actually complete an event. How did you feel?
It was, and for me I think it had become very personal that year. You know, it was a race that I'd entered, I think, about 2 days after I was diagnosed. I was just determined that I was going to still be here in the July for starters, and you know, I wanted to do something in a way that would kind of give back to a charity, but also just for me, I think it was just important to have a goal to aim towards.
That must have really kept you focused. And then you started on some hiking experiences, and you're going to Snowdonia with Neil, like you're stepping up what you're doing, and that was climbing Ugarn, you went up, and that must have felt exhilarating to just get out and do stuff like that again. But I'm also excited to hear about things that none of us would probably have the guts to do anyway, let alone you've had brain surgery. You were scrolling through social media and it caught your attention that you could do a skydive for charity, and I think most people who hadn't had brain tumour and brain surgery would sort of, I'd give that a miss, but to you it was like, wow, this is something I'm interested in. And it was only going to be 5 months after your surgery. So how did you get the medical clearance to begin with? Surely they weren't keen on taking someone who'd had this surgery.
Well, it was, I'm trying to think, it was, so I'd gone for my 6-week checkup after my surgery, and I asked the consultants, I said, so am I all right to go and do stuff at altitude? And they were like, but I think they envisioned hiking kind of scenarios. So I thought, oh, that's okay then. So I had a look on the actual skydive organiser's website, and it has like, there is a standard medical form for doing tandem skydive. So I had a flick through, and I'm thinking, I don't really see there being a problem. So I set up my Just Giving page and everything, and then we were on holiday I think we were on the island of Kos that summer, and I had a phone call from the event organiser, and she said, I've just noticed your story on your Just Giving page. She said, have you spoken to your consultant about this? I was like, oh yes, of course I have. So I'm quite backpedaling then, and I actually then at that point sent the medical form off. I had quite a nice message back from my consultant actually, who commended me on doing it, you know, but it was good to know that I was able to do it, and I have done another one since.
Wow. And there's so many inspirational quotes in your book that I could draw on, but you speak about so many things which would be motivating to others, and even about skydive, you're saying, you know, rather than let fear paralyse you, you use it as your motivation and show that it's not going to beat you. And I think you definitely demonstrated that with a skydive. And then, you know, you started to do even more mountaineering type feats, going to the Alps. And it was interesting how you spoke about the first trip you went back to the Alps. You thought of it as, right, okay, this is a place my husband and I loved, and you wanted to go back there like as a really like a circle of your recovery. This is where you were before, you want to go back. But, you know, you vividly described there are setbacks, and that trip didn't go as well as you were hoping. Was it the way you felt when you were there?
You know, my recovery had gone very well, you know, I'll be honest. I'd set myself goals for like 12 months, and within sort of that 5 month period I'd hit most of them. So, you know, it has kind of gone from down here up, plateaued a bit, and then when we got to the Alps I kind of went off a bit of a cliff really, and it was due to the fatigue as much as anything, and I'd not anticipated how much that would have affected me physically and mentally. You know, we'd gone out to do a walk that we've done before, you know, and basically you take a cable car up, and it's a ridge walk, and we usually get a train down, but I was going that slowly and I was so tired I fell. I think I fell within the first half hour, and you know, so that slowed me down a lot, and it was just stop start, and Neil was concerned we weren't going to make the train, you know, the last train down at the other end, so he made me turn back, and that didn't go down very well at all. So that was really hard for me. I think, you know, to be told actually you're not going to do this, you've got to go back, was hard. So the next day we thought, you know, we had planned, like, you know, harder days and easier days, because I knew there'd be issues, but I just hadn't anticipated how much of an issue it would be. So we'd arranged to hire a couple of mountain bikes and just go for a gentle ride along the riverside. And again, having only ridden on sort of tarmac cycle routes at home, I didn't realise the impact of having half a functioning balance system. And once we made it to the riverside, I think, you know, the lack of balance coupled with double vision on one side and that feeling of motion sickness. So I had a fast flowing river going one way on the other side, on one side, trees on the other that were double. It was almost like watching a 3D film without glasses, almost, is how I describe it. And then trying to actually ride that gravelly path. Again, I think there were a few times where I wobbled off, and the overwhelming feeling of being sick was just horrendous. So I couldn't wait to get back. We'd hired them for a full day, and I just thought, let's just go back. It was just a really horrible experience, and I felt so bad because Neil was looking forward to going off and exploring the mountain bike trails and stuff, and it just didn't pan out the way I thought it might. So I went home with quite a bit of taste in my mouth actually after that trip.
But you put that right by going back to the Alps in September 2019, and I'm really interested in the book how it's so clever how you've written this, that the word doubt becomes this kind of character, like an enemy that you're trying to overcome. And you talk about when things go bad, you feel like doubt has taken control, it's entered the room. You really eloquently put it. And you know, I think that's a lesson to all of us, that if there's doubt, it's something you can fight off with your motivation and thinking, no, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to do things, and you're inspiring people to try and achieve things that they thought maybe they couldn't achieve. And when doubt had, as you put it, started to win a little bit, you were going to put that right. Everything had been going sort of, like you say, in a good direction, but you were going to go back there. And I think you did even more challenges, didn't you, when you went back to the Alps?
Yes. So, you know, one of the biggest impacts of the surgery that I had was that my hearing and balance nerve was severed. So I've got profound hearing loss on one side and no balance function technically on one side. So we've had to do a lot of physio to overcome that weakness, just to sort of maintain a level of balance that I can go about day-to-day life. And I still work on that daily, whether it's through yoga. Running helps a lot with that as well, which is another motivation to keep getting out of the door. But going back to the Alps, I thought, you know, what can I do that will really prove that I have overcome this balance thing? And you know, we looked at some via ferrata routes. So via ferrata is like, it's almost like rock climbing, I suppose, in that you've got sort of iron rungs and that, you know, banged into the rock, and guide chains and stuff that you can sort of clip onto and move along the rock face before going up. And it was really good that I'd found this, because I thought this is like the ultimate challenge. And I'd found YouTube videos of this particular route, one section of which is like steel cable. So you're walking along a steel cable over a drop, and you're just clipped on with your lanyard. And so I thought, you know, I'm really up for this. If I can do this, then, you know, people can get upset at step ladders at home. There's no excuse, you know. So I was absolutely determined to do that. But I'd got, again, that night before, I think I woke up in a cold sweat, just thinking, oh my God, what the hell have I done? You know, I'm mad. I'm just mad thinking I can do this. I really got myself in a state. And then the guy that came to to take us to the place we were starting from, pulled up in his van and opened the door for us. And so to add to my doubts already, he leaned out to shake my hand and introduce himself, and he had no fingers. He'd lost them all to frostbite, you know, so from like that first joint he had no fingers. But he was telling me then that he'd taught himself to climb again, using just the stumps that he had, and he was absolutely amazing. You know, he was tying ropes, he was clipping in and out of carabiners, and absolutely fantastic. And I just thought, yeah, here's me worrying about getting across the steel cable, and this guy's tying knots in ropes to take us climbing with no fingers. So I've got no excuse really.
I think you did have an excuse, not in your mind.
Yeah, so it was quite an experience, but again, it was just such a great sense of achievement when I'd done it, because I thought, well, that has to be short of a tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon, that has to be one of the ultimate tests of balance. So it was really good.
And bravery. Wow, I mean, I can't imagine it. And soon after you got back, you were excited by another opportunity that came up for you, which was to climb Toucal in Morocco.
Yes.
So you jumped at that as well. So how was that?
Well, again, doubt entered the room on that one. You know, a friend of mine we talked about it previously. She was heading out to do a charity climb of Toucal with some work colleagues, and one of them had injured themselves on a training walk, so they couldn't fly because they were in a plaster cast. And I jokingly said weeks before this, I said, well, you know, if there's any room, I'll come along. So she texted me one day out of the blue and just said, you know, you said about Toucal. She said, do you want to come? She said, someone's pulled out because of injury. I was like, well, yeah, you know, I'd love to. And then I started thinking of all these excuses why I couldn't do it. And it's like, oh, you know, I can't afford it just yet. I've got back from the Alps, I've got another trip planned, and you know, what about work and all these excuses. And she said, well, forget any of that. She said, you know, if it was paid for, could you come? And I thought, well, she's just taken that one major excuse out of the equation. So I said, yeah, you know. So she, you know, we arranged it. I paid her back. You know, she paid for me during that time. Which was just, you know, so kind of her. You know, she's an absolutely wonderful, kind-hearted individual. And yeah, so I'd arranged to go, and I put all the plans in place, got all the kit that I needed. And then I was thinking, you know, I'd not been away without Neil, and that was a huge thing for me, because he's like, you know, he's not overly supportive, which is a good thing, because that does force me to do things that push me out of my comfort zone a little bit. But it's good to know that you have got that support there if you need it to fall back on. And when you're dealing with like impairments every day, so the hearing loss, the fatigue, when it's people that you live with and they're seeing that, how it impacts you every day, you know that they can pick up on those little subtleties and think, you know, do you need to sit down for a minute, and things like that. And you know, so to not have him there was huge for me. And Keris, as good a friend she is, hadn't lived with me and didn't know that side of what I was dealing with, so that was a huge worry. You know, I got myself again in such a state beforehand. I was really upset. I think I cried all the way to the airport, because I just didn't know if I was doing the right thing by going. But another part of me was like, but if you don't go and you don't do it, you know, you're going to really regret this. So I did. Obviously I went, and it was just an incredible experience.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I just can't imagine doing these sort of challenges. And also, you know, you're running as well, in that the furthest I've ever run is a marathon, and even this June you completed a 100k race. I mean, you know, so many of us have never done anything like that, and it's something I feel like, yeah, I need to try and do something like that. And you've already done that after having a brain tumour and brain surgery, and yeah, I mean, I'm just in full admiration of you. Like, where was that, in the Lake District that you did that this June? And how was that, and how did that sort of prepare you for upcoming challenges as well?
So I'd completed this last year, the same route. We had brilliant weather conditions, a bit like this, really. And I kind of hoped that I would get a better time. So I'd worked really hard with my training, and really focused on like nutrition as well. that side of things didn't go to plan nutrition wise. I felt this time round I struggled a lot with trying to get food down me. But yeah, I finished, I think it was about 4.25 hours ahead of my time last year.
Oh,
so
wow. Yeah,
it was quite an improvement, so I was really quite pleased with that.
Yeah, what tips would you give to us other runners to get through things when things feel tough during an event?
Initially I'd looked at this event as aid station to aid station, so it's not like 100k, it's like, right, I'm running 12k to the first stop and then I'm running another 15k to the second stop, and for me, and this isn't just with regard to running, but it's something I've done throughout my recovery, is just break things down into small manageable chunks.
So it's so wonderful to be able to chat to Sara, and the other thing I really want to mention is this will be a Guinness World Record attempt. It took a lot of determination and perseverance for Sara to get the recognition for the category for a world record attempt, and she will be going for the world record for single-sided deafness. But I really want to make the point that this doesn't do Sara justice, because she has got so many things she has to overcome: visual disturbances, balance problems, and debilitating fatigue, as well as the deafness. And it really will be a tough challenge, and I know we're all rooting for her. We know she can do it.